Hello, everyone. I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this interview special with Philadelphia filmmaker Rel Dowdell, who's made two significant films in recent years: Train Ride, a drama about three students in an all-Black American college who take advantage of a female student with consequences in one of the most acclaimed college dramas of recent decades. The second film, Where's Daddy, is a factual documentary which focuses on fathers' rights. And today we're going to be talking about the impact and legacy of African-American cinema. Rel, a warm welcome to you.
Yes, I'm glad, John. You're a preeminent film mind and historian, and I just think that this is a good time to talk about African-American film legacy with so much going on.
Okay, so obviously what I want to start off with is when we think of African-American cinema, I mean, what would you say is the definition of that?
I would just say that just like most African Americans who have had to make some inroads in whatever field they want to get into, it's kind of like a maverick way of doing it, or a guerrilla way of doing it. Like Oscar Micheaux was the first African American filmmaker, and he made what's called race movies. He made those films by any means necessary that he could get his hands on with making films, and he just, that's why he got such a high accolade when it comes to Black filmmaking, because he was really the first one to just take that guerrilla style, that, for lack of a better word, that guerrilla style of filmmaking, and if it wasn't for someone like him who said, I'm making films by any means necessary about the African American experience from my lens, there would have been no Gordon Parks or no Spike Lee, or, if that makes sense what I'm saying. There's always someone who sets even if they're unsung. Oscar Micheaux is unsung because you don't hear his name much, but he was the first Black filmmaker to put something on a screen with Black images from his own perspective. So that's where the legacy starts. But he didn't do it with the Hollywood system or the Panavision or the Steadicam. He did it with whatever he could get his hands on to shoot images. And that's what I think people need to understand, like that sometimes it's not what you don't have, it's what you have that you make the most of to be an artist. Right? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, definitely. It certainly does. And I mean, moving on, I mean, in terms of the influence and potential of African-American voices, I mean, obviously, how far does it, when you think of the past, I mean, past influences, say when it all started and when movies were being made and we were going forward, and so of course we think of Gordon Parks, we think of Spike Lee. I mean, how far do you think the influence goes in terms of both the mainstream and independent sector?
It's tough because there's been varying degrees of success along that journey. Of some films are great, like Killer of Sheep by Charles Burnett, that people haven't seen, or but there's some films like you mentioned, Spike Lee of Do the Right Thing, that were able to break through and get the acclaim and the recognition that it deserved. But let's go a little bit more into history. So the first African-American filmmaker to make a film that grossed $100 million, that's like the benchmark, I guess, for a hit movie, the $100 million mark. The first person to do that was Sidney Poitier with a film called Stir Crazy. A lot of people don't even know that Stir Crazy was even directed by a Black man. You see, great movie, kind of Gene Wilder, right, and Richard Pryor, the buddy comedy, for lack of a better term. And they say, well, who made that film? Well, that was a Sidney Poitier directed movie that cleared $100 million. It had never been done before in Hollywood before, but by Sidney Poitier making that kind of mainstream film that you've kind of mentioned, that $100 million benchmark that Sidney Poitier made with Stir Crazy opened a door, because that came out in 1980. That opened a door for other filmmakers afterwards to say, well, look, Sidney Poitier hit that $100 million mark. Maybe this makes it a little bit easier for the Spike Lees or the others of the world. I'm asking you, have you seen Stir Crazy before?
I have, yeah. I mean,
what do you think about it? I mean, it's on all the time. Did you like it?
It's a great movie. I mean, the interesting thing is, I remember his name being on the poster because it was on a local cinema. I remember it, but we weren't thinking in terms of, we think of the commercial potential because it had two great leads. I mean, they'd already done Silver Streak together, which I think was
love that movie. I love it.
About 2 or 3 years before.
That came out in 1976, Arthur Hiller.
Yeah, Arthur Hiller. And you know, I think the great thing is with the 70s, I think that was kind of an interesting period because with Gordon Parks doing Shaft, for example, and those movies, and then you have you have people like Pam Grier and doing the blaxploitation things. But
Yeah.
the great thing about Stir Crazy, again, it's had tremendous crossover appeal. I think when Eddie Murphy came on the scene,
It
and
holds up too.
yeah,
It actually holds. If you see, it came on last night. Like if you watch Stir Crazy right now, it holds up well as a buddy comedy that kind of in some ways is a road movie, because first they start off in one area and they get in a little beat up van and they end up going to jail. So it crosses genre. It's a road movie, it's a prison movie, it's a standalone comedy. So it had to have been challenging because from what I understand, Richard Pryor was not easy to work with. He was a great talent, but the mercurial personality and the other idiosyncrasies of his personality made it hard to Sidney Poitier to make that film. So I think Sidney Poitier with Stir Crazy, that movie to me is definition mainstream. It doesn't cater to any race. It's not a film that caters to blacks or whites. It's just a film that you watch it. It's just a comedy, and you would never know it was made by a black filmmaker unless you stay there, like you said, and say, "Oh my God, it's a black director." But it's definitely mainstream. That's a mainstream film that has not had the connotation of being black, white, or anything to it. If that makes sense or not.
It makes sense, definitely. So obviously going on from that, because obviously people have smashed this, they've sort of broken through the wall. I mean, inevitably, I read a biography of Eddie Murphy by Marion Ruth in the mid 80s. It was just after Beverly Hills Cop had just broken. And the interesting thing is at the time he was immensely talented. He'd sort of had 3 or 4 great movies with 48 Hours, Trading Place in Beverly Hills Cop. But there was talk of him appearing in things like Fences, doing a big screen version of Fences. And then strangely enough, that kind of never happened because he was already riding an incredible wave. I mean, Beverly Hills Cop was unmissable. I mean, it was one of the top films in the UK. So, right. But the great thing is I'm interested to know when you think of the challenges that African-American filmmakers like yourself are trying to get your films made and get things, because take, for example, Train Ride and Where's Daddy. I think they're great movies, and I think they need to be seen in a more wide berth because I think they're relevant and they're in significance. So what are still the major challenges for people like yourself?
Well, I made another movie too in between those called Changing the Game that Lionsgate released. And that was a film I also made with in Philadelphia, and it's a drama, and that got released in the theaters as well. Lionsgate, actually, I made it independently. Lionsgate picked that up and distributed that. But every challenge I've had, the main challenge really is to somehow when your film is done, it's like a baby. Where does it go? Like you have to learn to somehow get your film into the right hands so that the film will get released. There's a lot of films that are good that never get the light of day because somewhere along the journey, someone who was involved with the film made a wrong decision or something that regressed the progress of the movie. So whether you're black or you're white or whatever the genre of race is, you have to have a plan on the exit strategy of how does my film get from here to here. Now, the good thing is the streaming networks now, since COVID was such an apex, the streaming platforms now have become very popular. However, they're so popular now that they're backed up. Like I heard Netflix is backed up for like 4 years with content. Other places are backed up with years of content. So you have to be innovative now, whether you use your own distribution mechanism like YouTube or Vimeo or something. You have to be creative now. If one door closes for the Black filmmaker or any ethnic filmmaker or any filmmaker for that matter, how do you get your vision seen by the masses if the other doors are not open to you? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
And for me as a Black filmmaker, my whole concern is I never want to make something that is regressive, because all my films, Train Ride, Change the Game, Where's Daddy, I like to show the African American in a way that he or she can transcend whatever the circumstance is to beat the stereotypes. That's my agenda. But some people may not think that that's they want to be more comedic, or they don't mind showing African American people in a way that may not always be positive, as long as they can make the money or make the dollar be overly, for lack of a word, buffoonish. And I think that that's where the challenge for the Black filmmaker is: how serious are you about putting out progressive images of your people as opposed to just making commerce? That's the dilemma for the Black filmmaker. Do I stay true to my integrity and do the Sidney Poitiers or the Gordon Parks or the Spike Lees or the Charles Burnett's or the Julie Dashes? Do I want to make that legacy? Do I want to stay in that lane, or do I want to make something that just makes some money and keeps me in the pipeline so I can keep making movies regardless of the content? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah,
Maybe?
It does make sense.
Okay.
I mean, my next question is actually, you've actually touched on it just there. Was the funny thing is I'm receptive to all kinds of movies. That was what was great about watching Trainride, is I saw it from a story point of view. I wasn't thinking of the gender or the diversity issue. I was thinking, well, what is the story being told here? But when you look at the landscape of filmmaking from African-American filmmakers, what sort of issues and themes are rarely explored at the moment? And where do you feel what needs to be highlighted that could have as much positive impact as what you're trying to do with your own work?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Trainride, because with that, I was trying to blend different genres of film that I had seen over the years, some Hitchcock things, some thriller, some humor in some places, but I wanted the drama sometimes, and the dialogue of a Mean Streets like Scorsese, or some of the action that you would see. So I blended different genres that I had seen in different films over the years. But one thing it's always fascinated me about the Black filmmaker is there's some genres that haven't really been explored that I think could be explored even more. Like, for instance, you and I talked before about John Carpenter's Halloween, right? Which is, to me, an ingenious film about one's childhood. I could even imagine someone thinking of that, when I was a kid, there was a haunted house around it, and we always thought this house was haunted when no one went there. Just the horror genre, to me, is one that I'm not talking about demonic things, or I'm talking about the horror genre, what John Carpenter has done, or Hitchcock was doing, things that are everyday things that could end up being horror. I think that could be something more that African Americans need to plunge into, because the horror genre, if done well, if done responsibly, can be a powerful mechanism to get out a lot. For instance, one of my best friends is Tony Todd, and I've told you that before. Tony Todd told me when Bernard Rose and those people had the Candyman script, there was no backstory to Candyman. Tony Todd said he made up that whole backstory about the guy being a former Renaissance man who he had an interracial relationship and they cut off his hand. All that was Tony Todd's historic thinking. Let's make this guy have a backstory that's relevant to the film. So now you have the remake of Candyman, where it goes into even more of socioeconomic, racial connotation. But that original Candyman idea of this gentleman who was racially profiled because he was dating a white woman, and they kind of gave him this evisceration in public, like a public lynching, and then he comes back to haunt this community. That was a Tony Todd backstory. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to kind of focus on. You can blend a lot of these different historical things about African Americans that people don't know about into different genres like horror and thriller and suspense. So even though you're watching this generic film, the subtext of the film is something that could uplift people if it's done in a responsible. You've seen Candyman, though, right? You've seen the movie.
Yeah, I've seen both. I've actually seen the.
What do you think about each film? Did you see the racial views in each film?
I think both of them are very fine movies. I mean, Candyman, I remember seeing it back in '92, and it's one of my favorites horror films of all time. I mean, right to the very end when we get the payoff and all that. But also, it's genuinely shocking. I mean, Tony Todd has such an incredible presence. I mean, he was great in Final Destination. He was also recently in the Howard Ford lockdown film, The Lockdown Hauntings.
And he told me, this is back to what you said earlier, Eddie Murphy was originally one of the people that wanted to play Candyman. Eddie Murphy actually auditioned for Candyman, believe it or not. He thought that at that time he could make the transition into playing a horror character. That's probably why he made that film later on with Wes Craven called Vampire in Brooklyn. That was unusual kind of genre. But he wanted to actually take that success that you talked about earlier and be a Candyman. But as you can see, like right now, Tony Todd was made to play that role. I mean, as great as Eddie Murphy was, Tony Todd's voice, his height being 6'5", he also beat out I think someone else, either Fishburne or Ving Rhames, also auditioned for that George Romero remake of Night of the Living Dead, and he beat out both of those actors for the George Romero remake of Night of the Living Dead, the 1990 version. So he had done that version of Night of the Living Dead, and then he got Candyman after that came out. But like you said, Candyman is a film, even though it's directed by a Caucasian, the lead is an African-American male who has an indelible impact on the entire story, the entire film. And you know what's in that film that's interesting? The director, she was in Silence of the Lambs. Cassie Lemons was in that film, remember? Remember Cassie Lemons was the friend of Virginia Madsen, the African-American friend?
Yeah.
She directs films nowadays. She directed Harriet. She directed Black Nativity. She works all the time, but you never know. You just don't know. But I think there's ways to make the African-American experience more universal in storytelling. So even though you're seeing Black characters like Train Ride or Where's Daddy, anybody can watch the film and say, you know what, that I can relate to that film. That happened on my college campus with white students or Black students or Hispanic or even interracial. And Where's Daddy, that could be my dad. That could be my family's disenfranchised like that. I can relate to that 100%. I think when you look at the film from that perspective, like trying to do something that has more of a broad appeal than marginalized, then your film can have more of a greater impact. Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about partly genre before, but I mean, in terms of other genres, I mean, where would you feel that there's African-American filmmakers are sort of looking, that they feel that they can, with the influx of Netflix, where you've got these big epic mini series now, and they're now creating these incredible canvases through the streaming platforms like Apple and Netflix. I mean, what sort of genres would you most like to see exploited and expanded on?
You can always delve into more documentaries like I did. I mean, there's a lot of topics that have not been explored at all, that need to be told from the Black perspective, that people really need to be intrepid about. Like, it was difficult to make Where's Daddy because I had to go into the crux of the Black community and kind of get a lot of African-American men who never talked about this issue before to talk about this issue openly on camera with me. But there's other people there's other topics that I can think of that really need to be addressed. But I guess, John, I mean, that's another, you're a film. Now I'm thinking about what other genres do you think African Americans need to get into?
I would love to see more, I want to see, a mix of genres. So a thriller, possibly, I would love to see Cassie Lemons in a Silence of the Lambs thing as the main protagonist, and actually have them, for example, I would love to see, like something like Sea of Love, or or Pretty Woman, or again, really, I would say a spoof comedy like Airplane. That's incredibly, that kind of spoof kind of thing, which actually, a kind of movie like Airplane or something like that. I think I would love to see,
Can I share a screen? Am I able to share a screen at all here? Can I show you?
I can. Hang on a second.
I just want to show you something.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me just get to. Yeah. Let me just go to.
Now you got me thinking.
Okay, I've got multiple participants. You can share that now, Rel.
Okay. I want to show you something. When you said Silence of the Lambs, right? That was something that Anthony Hopkins made like his own role, right? I mean, you couldn't. But imagine this gentleman in the same role. If it was done from a Black, imagine this actor here. He could do it too.
Definitely, Jeffrey Wright. Yeah,
that guy could act, man.
He's excellent. I mean, he's in the new Batman, and he's, you know, he
Oh,
did
I
a
didn't know
great,
that.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, he's, as I say, he did an excellent job in No Time to Die as well. But I'd seen him in a few things before that, but he's got such a great
Range.
great range, and I want to see more. Yesterday I did an interview with the guy who wrote the making of Escape from New York book.
Oh yeah, I love that
which,
movie.
and I was talking about that, and there's some great pictures in the book of, with Isaac Hayes and all that. I think I'd just like to see a whole lot more broader spectrum with with what we've seen in the industry over the years. So I think I welcome anything that kind of celebrates the culture and the and that kind of thing are great anyway.
I agree.
So we're coming to the end of this now, Rel. Just a couple of final questions. Obviously, I mean, you've mentioned about the difficulty of finance and stuff like that as well. But also, I mean, one question that's often asked in the industry, and this is something I often ask many filmmakers of all backgrounds, about diversity and gender. What progress do you feel has been made? I mean, what do you feel still needs to be highlighted?
In what area? Like, tell
Well,
me.
just generally, where do you feel that, in terms of, because they're often saying, we've had things like the Golden Globes, we've had the certain issues from, when, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's diversity is always a touchy subject, and I think as African Americans, you have to kind of remember that you even though you may not be acknowledged by a greater source of acclaim, that shouldn't deter you from still continuing to make the best films that you want to make, because oftentimes you may not get the credit you deserve for what you do. So if you don't get the big award of if I don't think people should make films just trying to get the biggest award possible. You make the film that you think is personal to you, and you make it the best way possible. And if those accolades come from the greater being, then great. But I think, to your point, is whether you're Black, you're white, Hispanic, Asian, we should all appreciate each other's films the same way, and praise them the same way. No one should be ahead of the other. Everybody needs to learn to work together. And if it's a Black film that's the best one of the year, let's get behind it. If it's an Asian film, get behind it. But don't restrict your views because your views are polarized, and you say, well, that's not going to go over well with the masses. Forget the masses. As Spike Lee would say, for lack of a better term, just do the right thing, right? Do what's right for the artist, because somewhere out there, if you would want your film, I'll give you a perfect example. So when you make this point, so I wanted to, let me show my poster here. I want to show that here. So I'm going back to your shared screen. When I was doing, the poster for Where's Daddy, I looked at it like, let me just make a poster that doesn't demonize anybody, but a child crying, a young child crying, that's not a Black issue. That's every child issue. Every child at one point has to deal with some type of sadness or depression or feeling alienated. So when I said Where's Daddy, I was looking at it like, I didn't put in here, I just put in there a generic young African American child who was going through a struggle about the lack of having a father around, or dissension between the mother and the father, or lack of abandonment, or just low self-esteem. But those are not issues just for the Black community. Those are issues for every community. So me picking up that image there, I think, John, and I thank God, because, that film right now is Yale University has that film in its library. Harvard has it. Dartmouth has it. Penn has it. USC has it. UCLA has it. Almost every Ivy League school in this country has this film in its library. That's a lot. That says a lot, because I didn't make this film with that goal in mind. I just made the best film I could possibly make with the lowest amount of money that I could raise. That movie was made with paper clips and change. But the fact that I go on Harvard's website and I see my film in the library, or I go to USC or Yale or Penn or Dartmouth or Swarthmore, I was like, you know what? I made my point with that film. Like, it actually, the goal I set out to make that movie resonated because people understood it. Like, Princeton has it. Princeton is a school that most people would die to get in, right? I mean, but that school was one of the first ones to acquire that movie for its library. Who saw it? I don't know. But I'm glad, I thank God that the message of Where's Daddy was clear. And thank God, people like you, John. Let's not forget critics like you, because it's people like you, film critics, who review films that are off the radar, not the mainstream films. You can always get a mainstream film reviewed, Screen 5 or whatever is out. But it's harder for the critic to say, let me review the film that may not get as much ink, but I'm going to discover somebody to let the masses know that this person's work is noteworthy. You should see the movie. This is how you see it. And to me, that's what makes a great film critic. Someone that goes against the grain and reviews a film that does not get all the headlines, but you make it a headline because of the way you covered that movie.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I have to say that's the wonderful thing that I'm discovering about, watching films like yours. I mean, that's the great thing, is I've evolved as a person. My perspective is changing so much.
Yes.
And for me, that's the reward. So, be it a short film, a lot of the festival coverage I've been doing with Paris International Film Festivals, I see a lot of these films cold. I don't know much about them. I just watch them. And so when Train Ride was presented to me, again, it was a movie, and I read it. I read the synopsis. I thought, oh, that's an interesting one. I'll watch it. And then my response to that is to say, well, actually, this is important. I liked I liked the manner of which the way it was made. I think it was very dramatic. It was quite shocking at times. It's relevant. And I think that's the great thing, that if a movie can have that same kind of impact over like 20 years on, we have all our favorite movies. I mean, as I say, a film like Escape from New York, again, I'm very keen, speaking to the writer yesterday. It's great to restore it anyway. Rel, thank you so much for your time and insights today. I'm really appreciative for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's excellent.
John, you're the best.
Yeah, generally, so some general points. Please do check out Train Ride and Where's Daddy via your local streaming services. As mentioned, Where's Daddy has been entered into a lot of the key universities in America. It's got an incredible rating on Rotten Tomatoes and well worth looking into, so do check it out. It's got a very valid statement to make if you want to talk about important social issues.
Yes.
Support independent films and filmmakers like Rel. And for more articles, interviews, and reviews from me, which also include the review for Train Ride and Where's Daddy, you can go to www.filmandtvnow.com, and you can watch a replay of this interview via my official YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review. Thank you again, Rel, and thanks one and all for watching.
Thank you, John. Thank you, brother.